Ironhold did not fear invasion. It prepared for it. From space, the fortress world looked like a planet wrapped in iron bones. Defense rings circled its continents in layered formation, each one bristling with weapon platforms that tracked every object within 1 million kilometers. Orbital cannons drifted in silent procession, their barrels longer than city blocks, their firing chambers glowing faint blue with stored energy. Shield grids shimmered across the atmosphere, like distant lightning frozen in place, pulsing once every few seconds, as if the planet itself were breathing. Even the magnetic field had been engineered. Decades ago, Ironhold scientists had altered the planet's electromagnetic signature to interfere with enemy targeting systems. The side effects were minor. Music played slightly off-key, communication signals occasionally drifted, but hostile missiles rarely flew straight, and that was what mattered. For 300 years, no enemy had conquered Ironhold. Entire armadas had broken themselves against its defenses. Pirate coalitions had turned away at the sight of its orbital rings. Warlords from the outer territories whispered its name the way ancient sailors whispered about storms they had no intention of sailing into. Ironhold was strong. Ironhold was feared, and Princess Lyra Ashford knew something the galaxy did not. Ironhold was brittle. She had discovered this truth not through battle but through patience, not through courage but through data. And now, standing alone in the deepest chamber beneath the capital bastion, she was the only person on the planet who understood how fragile their strength truly was. The chamber was circular, carved from black stone centuries ago, and threaded with glowing circuitry that pulsed in rhythm with the planet's defense grid. No windows, no natural light. Long-range sensors had already detected coalition movements among pirate states and outer warlords. Intelligence reports confirmed what the numbers suggested. Something was forming beyond the trade lanes, something organized. Multiple factions that had spent decades fighting each other were suddenly coordinating, sharing routes, sharing targets. Ironhold needed leadership, the kind that would hold when everything else broke. The council expected her to choose a legend. But Lyra was not searching for a legend. She was searching for survival. And she had learned through months of quiet study that no one on the council knew about, that those two things were not the same. She lifted her hand, and one pane expanded before her, filling the air with light. Commander Darius Kane. The name alone carried weight. 32 confirmed enemy vessels destroyed. 2 pirate flotillas shattered in decisive engagements. Hero of the Battle of Talon Rift. A confrontation that was celebrated across public channels every year with dramatic reenactments and soaring music. His image rotated slowly in the air before Lyra. Broad shoulders, a scar across one cheek that he had never bothered to have removed because scars told stories, and Kane understood stories. His expression was carved in permanent confidence, the look of a man who had never once doubted a decision he had made. The galaxy loved Darius Kane. Lyra studied the civilian casualty report of bomb attached to his victories. It was buried 3 layers deep in the file beneath commendations and ceremony footage. Most people never scrolled that far. Lyra always did. The numbers were not catastrophic. They were not scandalous. They were simply present. Acceptable losses, the evaluation concluded. Standard parameters within engagement protocols. Acceptable. Lyra held that word in her mind for a long moment. She thought about what it meant to be a civilian on a border colony, watching the sky light up with plasma fire, hearing the evacuation sirens start too late because the fleet commander had prioritized offensive positioning over corridor clearance. Acceptable. She dismissed the file. Kane's image dissolved into scattered light. Another pane brightened. Captain Silas Greer. 21 offensive campaigns, 0 retreats, known across military channels for decisive strikes and relentless pursuit. His record was spotless in one specific way. He had never once ordered a withdrawal, never once pulled back. His ships advanced until the enemy broke or burned. 0 retreats. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. She expanded the secondary file, the one that lived beneath the commendations. Civilian evacuation delays in 3 separate engagements. Collateral damage reports from border colonies where Greer's pursuit of retreating enemies had drawn fire through populated zones. Risk assessments that had been overridden in favor of speed. 0 retreats, she murmured softly, which suggests 0 pauses. A commander who never stopped to think about what he was running through was not disciplined. He was reckless with a perfect record. She closed that file as well. Around her, thousands of decorated heroes waited in quiet digital patience. Ironhold had never lacked warriors. Every generation produced men and women willing to climb into warships and burn across the void in defense of their world. The planet's military academies were among the finest in human space. Its training programs were brutal and effective. Its veterans were feared. What Ironhold lacked was endurance. Not the endurance of metal and energy shields, but the endurance of people. The endurance of a population under siege. The endurance of hope when the sky was on fire and the ground was shaking, and the only voice on the emergency channel was telling you to remain calm while explosions walked closer. Lyra turned toward a larger projection at the center of the chamber. She had saved this for last because it was the thing that kept her awake at night. A simulation grid unfolded before her, filling the air with holographic light. She initiated Scenario 47B, full planetary siege. The projection showed everything. Orbital bombardment hammering the defense rings, shield degradation spreading across continents like cracks in ice, urban centers losing power, communication arrays going dark one by one, and then the thing that mattered most, people. Millions of them rendered as flowing data streams moving through evacuation corridors, or trying to. The corridors clogged within the first hour. Misinformation spread through civilian channels because the military communication protocols were designed for soldiers, not for frightened families. Fear traveled faster than plasma. Lyra fast-forwarded. She had watched this simulation 47 times. She knew exactly where it ended. The planet did not fall because the cannons failed. The cannons performed admirably. The planet did not fall because the shields collapsed. The shields held longer than projected. The planet fell because people panicked, because fear ate through the population like acid through cloth, and once morale collapsed, nothing else mattered. Soldiers abandoned posts to find their families. Evacuation corridors became stampedes. Emergency systems designed to function in orderly conditions broke under the weight of chaos. In 72% of modeled invasions, morale collapse preceded structural collapse. Fear was the true weapon. Not the enemy's guns, not their warships. Fear. Lyra exhaled slowly. The Council still believed wars were won by firing first, by deploying the biggest ships, by choosing the commander with the most kills and the loudest reputation. But Lyra had studied history deeply, not just military history, but the history of civilizations under pressure, the history of populations that survived impossible odds and the populations that did not. Wars were won by lasting longer, and lasting longer meant keeping people together, keeping them calm, keeping them believing that someone was thinking about them, not just about the enemy. Her hand moved again. This time she was not looking at rank, not looking at decoration, not looking at kill counts or fleet victories or public approval ratings. She was looking for something else entirely, a pattern she had defined in her own search algorithm, one she had never shared with the Council. A smaller pane brightened near the outer ring. Lieutenant Ethan Mercer. The system seemed almost surprised to present him. His file was modest in size, barely a fraction of Kane's or Greer's. No public hero broadcasts, no ceremonial footage, no dramatic reenactments, just service logs. Lyra tilted her head slightly. 17 successful extraction missions. She paused. 0 casualties. She blinked once. Read the number again. 0. Not low, not minimal, not acceptable. 0. She expanded the first mission report. Mining colony on the moon of Ardent Vale. Pirate incursion. Standard smash and grab operation targeting mineral reserves. Mercer had been ordered to hold the docking ring until reinforcements arrived. Standard defensive posture. Hold the line. Wait for the cavalry. Instead, Mercer had rerouted his squad to escort civilian transports through a maintenance conduit that was not rated for combat traffic. It was a service tunnel designed for equipment carts and repair crews, barely wide enough for a transport shuttle if you folded the wings. The risk was enormous. If the conduit failed, everyone inside would die. Mercer went anyway. The conduit collapsed behind them after the last transport passed through. The structural failure sealed the passage completely. The pirates reached the docking ring and found nothing. No hostages, no leverage, no panicked civilians to use as shields, just empty corridors and a collapsed tunnel. All civilians survived. His final note in the mission report read, "Recommend structural inspection of conduit Gamma 12. Also recommend improved signage in civilian sectors. Panic reduced evacuation efficiency by an estimated 14%. Clearer directional markers could reduce confusion in future emergencies." Lyra felt the corner of her mouth lift slightly, the first genuine expression she had allowed herself in hours. No self-praise, no mention of personal risk, no dramatic account of the moment he decided to disobey orders and lead people through a collapsing tunnel with pirates closing in behind him. Only improvement suggestions, only ways to make the next evacuation better. She opened the second mission, asteroid colony under meteor bombardment. Not an enemy attack this time, but a natural disaster that required the same skills and the same instincts. A rogue cluster of debris had been knocked loose from a nearby asteroid belt by gravitational fluctuations, and the colony's civilian warning systems had given less than 40 minutes of notice. Most military commanders would have focused on the colony's shield generators, reinforcing structural defenses to weather the bombardment. Standard procedure: protect the infrastructure first. Mercer did not follow standard procedure. He deployed decoy beacons along the projected meteor paths, drawing strikes away from hospital transport routes. The beacons were not designed for that purpose. They were communication relays, repurposed on the spot with field modifications that his engineering team improvised in under 12 minutes. It was the kind of creative problem-solving that never appeared in tactical manuals, because no manual could anticipate every situation, and the people who wrote manuals were rarely the ones standing in the path of falling rock. When his ship's navigation AI malfunctioned from electromagnetic interference generated by the meteor impacts, most pilots would have pulled back. The debris field was dense. Visibility was compromised. Flying manually through it was not brave. It was, by any reasonable assessment, borderline suicidal. Mercer flew manually through the debris field for 23 minutes. He guided hospital transports through gaps in the falling rock that closed behind them seconds after they passed. His hands on the controls, his eyes on the path, no AI assistance, no autopilot. Just a man making decisions faster than any algorithm could process the variables, because algorithms did not have the one thing Mercer had in abundance: the refusal to let someone else die. 3 commendations were offered by the colonial governor. Mercer declined all 3. His response, filed in the official record with the same flat practical tone that characterized everything he wrote: recognition unnecessary. Redirect resources to residential shield repairs in Sector 9. The south wall sustained microfractures during bombardment and will fail within 60 days without reinforcement. Lyra's long ears angled forward as she read, an involuntary gesture, the equivalent of leaning in, the equivalent of a heart beating faster, though her face betrayed nothing. She continued through the files. Evacuation from a border outpost during a chemical breach. This one was different from the others. The outpost was under active attack when the breach occurred. A coolant line in the station's reactor had been ruptured by enemy fire, releasing a cloud of compounds that would dissolve organic tissue within minutes of sustained exposure. The attacking force, a small pirate raiding party, was still outside the station, still firing. Most commanders would have continued the fight, sealed the breach section, accepted the losses in that zone, and focused on repelling the attackers. The people in the contaminated section would be listed as casualties of the engagement. Regrettable but unavoidable. The math was simple: lose a section to save the station. Mercer did not do math that way. He opened a communication channel to the pirate raiding party, not to threaten, not to bluff, not to negotiate from strength. He transmitted a detailed scan of the chemical cloud and explained in calm and precise language that the compounds drifting through the station's ventilation system did not distinguish between defenders and attackers, that the cloud was expanding, that within 20 minutes it would reach the docking ring where the pirate ships were attached. He told them the truth, and he asked for time. The pirate commander, faced with the prospect of his own ships being contaminated by chemicals that would eat through hull seals within hours, agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Not out of mercy, out of self-preservation. But the result was the same. Mercer bought enough time for every civilian in the contaminated section to be evacuated through emergency airlocks, to transport shuttles he had prepositioned during the first minutes of the attack before anyone else had realized the coolant line was compromised. Personal risk rating, extreme. He had walked through the edge of the chemical cloud himself to carry a child whose mother had collapsed from early exposure. The medical report noted minor tissue damage to his hands and forearms. Mercer's own report did not mention this. It mentioned the child's recovery and the mother's treatment timeline. Civilian survival rate 100%. Lyra stopped pacing. She had not realized she had been pacing. She pulled up his psychological profile. The language was clinical, but the picture it painted was vivid. Displays high adaptive empathy, maintains humor under stress, prioritizes preservation of life over personal advancement, shows no pattern of seeking recognition or reward, no record of disciplinary action, no hunger for promotion, no ambition for glory, functions most effectively under high-pressure conditions where human lives are at immediate risk. One line in the evaluation stood out. Subject appears to derive personal meaning primarily from the act of preserving them others. This orientation is deeply internalized and does not appear to be performative. Just patterns. Save the people, then end the fight 17 times, 17 different situations, 17 different types of danger. And every single time, the same result. Everyone lived. Lyra returned to the central simulation grid. Her heart was beating slightly faster now, though her expression remained composed. She initiated a new run of Scenario 47B, but this time she made one change. She replaced the standard command algorithm with Ethan Mercer's decision patterns. Not his tactics, his patterns, the way he prioritized, the order in which he allocated resources, the timing of his decisions relative to civilian movement rather than enemy movement. The invasion scenario unfolded again. Cannons fired later. They did not open up at maximum range to achieve first strike advantage. Instead, they held until evacuation corridors were confirmed clear, then fired in coordinated bursts that covered retreat routes rather than targeting enemy flagships. Evacuations opened earlier, before the bombardment reached critical intensity, before panic set in, while people still had time to move with purpose instead of terror. Civilian panic dropped by 37%. Shield collapse probability decreased not because the shields were stronger, but because interior systems remained stable. Power was not diverted from residential sectors to fuel offensive weapons. Emergency services continued functioning because the infrastructure that supported them was still intact. Overall planetary survival probability increased. Lyra stared at the numbers for a long time. The blue light of the projection painted her face in shifting patterns as the simulation completed its run. He did not win faster. He lost less. And losing less meant surviving longer. And surviving longer meant winning. The logic was so simple it was almost invisible. The entire military establishment of Ironhold had been trained to think in terms of destruction. How many enemy ships could you kill? How quickly could you break their formation? How decisively could you end the engagement? And that thinking had produced 3 centuries of victories against enemies who attacked in the old way with fleets and cannons in brute force. But the coming war would not be fought the old way. The intelligence reports made that clear. The coalition was not coming to outgun Ironhold. They were coming to outlast it, to grind it down, to create enough fear and chaos that the population would crack before the shields did. And against that kind of war, every decorated hero in this chamber was the wrong answer, except one. The chamber doors slid open quietly behind her. Her chief adjutant entered his posture rigid with the formal bearing that palace staff maintained at all times. He was an older man, gray at the temples, who had served 3 generations of the Ashford bloodline. His loyalty was absolute. His discretion was legendary. "Your Highness," he said, "the council convenes in 20 minutes. They request your preliminary selection." Lyra did not turn immediately. She was still watching the simulation end differently than it had every other time she had run it, watching the number that mattered most. Civilian casualties 0. "Send them this file," she said calmly. The adjutant stepped closer. His eyes moved across the floating pane. He read the name. There was a pause, not a dramatic pause, not a theatrical hesitation. The pause of a man who had served royalty long enough to know when a decision was about to cause an earthquake. "Lieutenant Mercer," he asked carefully. "Yes, Your Highness, the Council expects a more decorated candidate. Commander Kane has already been discussed publicly as the likely choice. The media channels have been preparing coverage. Lyra finally turned to face him. Her expression was calm. Her voice carried the particular weight of someone who had made a decision after 31 hours of careful analysis and was not interested in revisiting it. Decoration corrodes, she replied. Ironhold already has enough metal. The adjutant hesitated. He was too experienced to argue with a direct statement from the princess, but too loyal to remain silent when he believed she was walking toward danger. The public will question this choice, he said. Commander Kane has broad support. His name alone provides confidence. The public wants safety, Lyra answered. Not spectacle. They want to know that when the sky burns, someone is thinking about them. Not about glory, not about kill counts. About them. The adjutant studied her face. He had known her since she was a child. He had watched her grow from a quiet girl who spent too much time in the data archives into a woman who saw patterns that others missed. He had learned over the years that when Lyra Ashford spoke with this particular quiet certainty, she was usually right. He nodded slowly, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. In the ceremonial office, he asked carefully. For the appointment ceremony. Lyra turned back to the glowing pane. 17 extractions, 0 casualties. Notify them as well, she said. For a commendation ceremony, the adjutant asked. Lyra's gaze did not waver. She looked at the portrait of Ethan Mercer floating in the blue light. Calm expression, faint crease at his brow, as if he were permanently skeptical of anything unnecessary. No decorations visible, no medals, no dramatic scars, just a face that looked like it belonged to someone who solved problems quietly and expected no applause for doing so. For a proposal, she said. Silence filled the chamber. The word hung in the air between them, heavier than anything the floating panes of data could display. The adjutant's composure held but barely. His throat moved once. A marriage proposal. Your Highness, Lyra did not elaborate. She did not explain. She did not justify. The data was clear. The simulation was clear. The pattern was clear. Ironhold needed to bind its future to a new philosophy of defense, and the strongest binding in the political structure of the Ashford dynasty was marriage. This was not romance. This was architecture. Yes, she said simply. The adjutant swallowed once. Yes, Your Highness. After he left, Lyra remained alone with the floating light. The chamber hummed softly around her, the sound of circuitry and cooling systems, and the distant vibration of orbital defense platforms maintaining their eternal watch above the atmosphere. The galaxy believed Ironhold was unbreakable because of its weapons, because of its orbital cannons and shield grids and defense rings that could tear apart any fleet foolish enough to approach. And that belief had served the planet well for 3 centuries. But weapons only delayed defeat. They did not prevent it. A strong enough enemy, a persistent enough siege, a long enough war, and eventually the weapons would fail. The shields would fall. The cannons would overheat. And then what? Then it came down to people, to whether they held together or fell apart, to whether they trusted each other or turned on each other, to whether someone somewhere in the command structure was thinking about them. Lyra studied Ethan Mercer's portrait one final time. He did not look like a legend. He did not look like the kind of man whose name would echo through military academies for generations. He looked like someone who would fix a broken evacuation sign at 2 in the morning because it might save someone's life during the next emergency. That was exactly what Ironhold needed. She turned and walked toward the chamber doors. In 20 minutes, she would stand before the Defense Council and tell them that the most important military appointment in 3 centuries would go to a lieutenant with no major fleet command experience, no public recognition, and no ambition for the position. The council would resist. The media would question. The public would wonder. And far beyond the planet's defense rings in the dark between systems, enemy fleets were already gathering. They had heard the whispers traveling through trade channels. Ironhold had chosen a soft commander. The fortress world was distracted. The time to strike was now. They believed Ironhold had grown weak. They were wrong. Ironhold had grown wise. It simply did not look like what they expected wisdom to look like. The council chamber erupted exactly as Lyra had predicted. She stood at the head of the wussing obsidian table surrounded by the 12 most powerful military and political figures on Ironhold. Holographic projections floated above the table surface, displaying candidate profiles. Commander Kane's image held the largest frame positioned at center by default. The system assumed what the council assumed. Lieutenant Ethan Mercer Lyra repeated, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. General Marcus Holt was the first to rise. He was a broad man with silver hair cropped close to his skull and a chest full of campaign ribbons that clinked faintly when he moved. He had commanded Iron Holt's Northern Defense Corridor for 15 years before joining the council. His reputation was built on 3 decisive fleet engagements that had crushed pirate incursions before they reached the inner systems. "With respect, Your Highness," Holt said, his tone suggesting the precise amount of respect required by protocol, "and not a gram more. This selection is unprecedented. Lieutenant Mercer has no large-scale command experience. He has led extraction teams, small unit operations. He has never commanded a fleet in open engagement." Lyra met his gaze. "Run the simulations," she said. The chamber fell quiet. A technician at the far wall activated the central projection. Scenario 47B unfolded in holographic light above the table. Planetary siege, orbital bombardment, shield degradation. The council had seen versions of this simulation before, but never with Mercer's decision patterns integrated. They watched in grudging silence as the numbers changed. Civilian survival rate climbed. Panic indicators dropped. Infrastructure damage decreased because emergency systems remained functional. Planetary survival probability increased by 12%. 12%. For Iron Hold, with its 3 centuries of optimized defense protocols and its military academies that graduated the finest officers in human space, 12% was enormous. It meant the difference between holding for 6 months and holding for a year. The difference between a population that endured and a population that shattered. The numbers are compelling. One counselor admitted reluctantly. But numbers are not leadership. Holt sees the opening. Commander Kane is a proven leader. His name alone will reassure the public. He has experience managing large fleet operations. He understands the political landscape. Lyra let them speak. She had expected this. She had prepared for it. She allowed every objection to land, every criticism to be voiced, every doubt to fill the room. Then when the silence returned, she spoke. "Commander Kane's record includes civilian casualty rates that this council has classified as acceptable. Captain Greer's record includes evacuation delays in 3 border colonies. These are the candidates you consider proven leaders. I am not questioning their courage. I am questioning their priorities." The chamber shifted. Some counselors exchanged glances. Holt's expression hardened. "War requires hard choices," he said firmly. "Yes," Lyra replied. "The question is, who makes the hard choice to save people instead of choosing the easier path of simply winning battles and accepting losses?" The vote was not unanimous. It was not close to unanimous. But Lyra held constitutional authority over military appointments, and the council's role was advisory. When the final objection had been raised and answered, she made the appointment official. Lieutenant Ethan Mercer would become the supreme commander of planetary defense. The chamber emptied slowly. Counselors filed out in clusters, murmuring in tones that carried disapproval without quite crossing into insubordination. Holt was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at Lyra with an expression that was difficult to read, something between frustration and calculation. "I hope your data is correct, Your Highness," he said. Lyra watched him go. She filed that expression away in her memory. She had learned long ago that the most dangerous opposition was the kind that smiled as it left the room. That evening, Lyra returned to the simulation chamber alone. She ran Scenario 47B one more time. Not because she doubted her decision, but because she needed to see the numbers again. The way some people needed to hear a certain piece of music when the world felt uncertain. The numbers were her music. They were the thing that told her she was not wrong, even when everyone around her believed she was. The simulation ended the same way. Civilian casualties 0. She closed the projection and stood in darkness for a long moment. The weight of what she had done pressed against her chest like a physical force. She had staked her reputation, her political authority, and possibly her dynasty's future on a man who fixed evacuation signs. If she was wrong, Ironhold would not just lose a battle. It would lose faith in the Ashford bloodline. And faith once lost did not return. But the data was clear. And Lyra Ashford trusted data the way soldiers trusted their weapons. With her life. What she did not see was what happened after Marcus Holt left the Bastion. What she did not see was the encrypted channel that opened from his private quarters that evening, reaching beyond the defense rings, beyond the trade lanes, into the dark spaces where signals were designed to vanish. The idealists usually survived because they were standing behind the people who actually did the fighting. The people who died were the ones on the front line following orders that prioritized sentiment over strategy. He would not let that happen to Ironhold. The message he sent was 6 words long. Ironhold has chosen a weak commander. The reply came within the hour. Brief, cold, efficient, advance the timeline. And in the darkness between star systems, ships that had been gathering for months began to move. Meanwhile, aboard a standard military cruiser approaching Ironhold from the inner trade routes, Lieutenant Ethan Mercer stood at the forward viewport and watched the fortress world fill the stars before him. He had never seen anything like it. The briefing files had included images, but images did not capture the scale. Defense rings shimmered in layered formation, each one a manufactured moon of weapons and sensors, each one large enough to cast a shadow across a continent. Energy grids pulsed in steady rhythm across the atmosphere like the heartbeat of something impossibly large. Thousands of weapon platforms tracked his approaching ship, verifying identity with machine precision. Red targeting lasers swept across the hull and vanished. Confirmation signals pinged back and forth in rapid succession. The planet looked like something that had been designed by people who believed the universe was fundamentally hostile and had decided to prove it right. Behind Mercer, Sergeant Nora Calloway stood with her arms crossed, watching the same view with considerably less awe and considerably more skepticism. Nora had served with Mercer for 6 years across 9 of his 17 extraction missions. She was his second in command, his tactical conscience, and the only person in the military who could tell him he was being an idiot and have him actually listen. She was compact, sharp-eyed, and practical in the way that people become practical when they have spent years in situations where impractical thinking gets people killed. Her hair was cut short for efficiency. Her uniform was regulation but undecorated. She and Mercer shared a philosophy about metals. They were heavy and served no functional purpose. "You know this is a mistake," she said. "Not a question." Probably, Mercer replied without looking away from the viewport. "You have never commanded anything larger than a 12-person extraction team." "Also true. And now you are going to command the planetary defense of the most heavily armed world in human space." Mercer swallowed once. "When you say it out loud, it does sound concerning." Nora moved to stand beside him. The light from Ironhold's defense grid played across both their faces. She studied his profile. He looked the same as he always did. Calm, slightly tired, faintly amused by circumstances that would have paralyzed most people with anxiety. "Why did you accept?" she asked. Mercer was quiet for a moment, because she asked the right question. Who did the princess? In her briefing message, she did not ask if I could win a war. She asked if I could keep people alive during one. Nobody has ever asked me that before. Nora said nothing for a long moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and straightened her posture. "Well," she said, "let us go keep people alive then." Mercer smiled faintly. "I preferred shuttles," he muttered softly. The cruiser docked without ceremony. No music, no banners, no honor guard waiting on the landing platform, only efficiency. Mercer stepped off the ship carrying a single duffel bag and wearing a uniform that fit correctly but showed no particular effort toward presentation. His boots were clean but not polished to mirror shine. Nora followed 2 steps behind, her eyes already scanning the docking bay with the automatic threat assessment of someone who never fully trusted any environment she had not personally secured. Inside the Capitol bastion, stone walls rose beside glowing circuitry. Ancient fortress design blended with advanced systems in a way that felt both old and unstoppable. He was escorted by 2 guards who said nothing. Nora walked beside him, cataloging every corridor, every security checkpoint, every automated drone that scanned them as they passed. The bastion's interior was a monument to a civilization that had decided to make permanence its religion. Stone walls 6 meters thick rose beside circuitry that carried data at the speed of light. The architecture felt both ancient and unstoppable, as if the builders had understood that true strength was not about choosing between tradition and technology. It was about refusing to abandon either. Mercer ran his hand along the stone wall as he walked. Cold, dense. The kind of stone that would still be standing long after the circuitry threaded through it had been replaced 1,000 times. Someone centuries ago had built these walls knowing they were building for people they would never meet. That was a kind of love Mercer understood. Tall doors opened into the planetary defense chamber. Princess Lyra Ashford stood at the center of it. She was not seated on a throne. She was not surrounded by advisors or attendants. She stood before a projection of the planet itself, rotating slowly in blue light, and she was studying it with the focused attention of someone who had spent a very long time thinking about what she was looking at. The way a doctor studies a patient, the way an engineer studies a structure that everyone else believes is sound, but she knows is cracked. She turned as he entered, her long tapered ears angled slightly forward. Her dark eyes assessed him with a directness that most people would have found uncomfortable. There was no warmth in the assessment, no coldness either. It was precise, clinical, the gaze of someone who had already studied every file, every report, every psychological evaluation associated with the person standing before her, and was now comparing the data to the reality. Nora stopped at the threshold of the chamber without being asked. Some spaces required only the people who belonged in them. She recognized this as one. Lieutenant Mercer Lyra said calmly. He bowed. The bow was slightly awkward, the gesture of a man who had spent most of his career on ships and outposts, where bowing was not required. He had practiced it twice on the cruiser, both times badly, and Nora had told him to stop practicing because it was getting worse. But the bow was sincere. There was no false humility in it and no false confidence. Just a man acknowledging the situation he had walked into and offering the only thing he had to offer. Himself as he was, without decoration. Your Highness, he said. There was no audience, no council, no cameras. Just the two of them in a room full of blue light and the quiet hum of a planet preparing for war. Lyra stepped closer. Her expression shifted. Not dramatically. Lyra Ashford did not do anything dramatically. But the clinical assessment softened into something thoughtful. The expression of someone who had already made a decision but understood that decisions made from data required confirmation from reality. She studied his face, the calm expression, the faint crease at his brow deeper in person than in his portrait, the mark of someone who'd spent more time thinking than sleeping. His hands which hung at his sides without tension. The hands of someone who did not need to project strength because strength was not something he performed. It was something he simply had. If the shields fail, she asked quietly, what do you save first? Mercer did not hesitate. The answer came without thought because it was not a thought. It was a conviction so deep it had become reflex woven into his nervous system by 17 missions in 17 moments, where the only thing that mattered was getting people out alive. The evacuation corridors, he said. Her eyes sharpened slightly. Not the command centers, no. Not the orbital cannons, no. He met her gaze steadily. There was no defiance in it, no challenge, just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from having answered the same question 100 times in the silence of your own mind and always arriving at the same answer. If people survive, he said, we rebuild everything else. Command centers are rooms, cannons are machines. We can build new rooms and new machines. We cannot build new people. Silence lingered in the chamber. The projection of iron hold rotated slowly between them, blue light painting their faces in shifting patterns. Two people who had never met before standing in the heart of a fortress world, sharing a conviction that almost no one else on the planet understood. Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. Not romance, not attraction, something rarer. Recognition. The recognition of finding someone who saw the world the way you did after years of believing you were the only one. She had chosen him from data, from numbers, from patterns in service logs and simulation algorithms. But standing here hearing him say the words she had calculated, he would say she understood something the data could not have told her. He meant it, not as strategy, not as philosophy. He meant it the way you mean a prayer, the way you mean a promise made to someone who cannot hear you. Then for the first time, Lyra allowed a faint smile. It changed her face completely. The analytical precision softened. The weight of 31 sleepless hours eased. For one moment, she was not a princess carrying the future of a planet. She was a woman who had found what she was looking for. Good, she said. And somewhere above them, far beyond the atmosphere, orbital cannons completed their routine calibration with a deep, resonant hum. Ironhold was ready for war, but for the first time in 3 centuries, its future would not depend on who destroyed the most enemies. It would depend on who refused to lose a single life. The first 3 days were quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes something terrible. Ethan Mercer stood in the Planetary Defense Command Center, a vast circular room on the upper level of the Capitol Bastion, surrounded by holographic displays that showed every orbital platform, every shield grid sector, every defense ring in real time. The room hummed with the low-frequency pulse of Ironhold's surveillance network. Dozens of officers sat at tiered consoles monitoring data streams that never stopped flowing. They knew their jobs. What they did not know was what to make of the man who had just been placed in command of all of it. Mercer could feel their eyes on him. Not hostile, not yet. Curious, skeptical. The way veteran soldiers always looked at someone who had been promoted past them, wondering what he had done to deserve it and suspecting the answer was nothing. He did not blame them. He would have wondered the same thing. Nora stood 2 paces behind him, her arms folded, her expression carefully neutral. She had been cataloging the room since they entered. Exits, sight lines, communication relays, the body language of every officer present. Old habits from extraction missions. You always knew your environment before you tried to change it. Mercer studied the defense grid display for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, not loud, not commanding in the way that military dramas portrayed command. Just clear. I need the power allocation records for the last 6 months, he said. Specifically the distribution between ceremonial districts and residential zones. The officer nearest to him, a captain with 15 years of service, and the expression of someone who had heard a great many foolish requests in her career, looked up from her console. Ceremonial districts, sir. Yes. How much energy is currently routed to the Palace Quarter, the Memorial Corridor, and the Victory Plaza lighting grid? The captain pulled the data. The number appeared on screen. Mercer studied it. Then he nodded slowly, the way a doctor nods when a diagnosis is confirmed. Reroute 60% of that allocation to residential shield reinforcement in the sectors 7 through 14. The room went still, a collective pause, fingers hovering over consoles, eyes shifting sideways to gauge whether anyone else was going to say something. The Palace Quarter lighting grid was not just decoration. It was symbol. For 300 years, the brilliance of Ironhold's ceremonial districts had been visible from orbit, a statement to every approaching ship that this world was wealthy, powerful, and unafraid. Dimming those lights was not a tactical decision. It was a cultural one. Sir, the captain said carefully, that allocation has been standard since the founding era. The ceremonial grid is considered essential for public morale. Mercer turned to face her. His expression was patient, not condescending. Patient. The expression of someone who had explained difficult things to frighten people many times and had learned that patience was more effective than authority. When the bombardment starts, he said, and people in Sector 12 lose power to their emergency shelters because the grid was overloaded, they will not feel reassured by the fact that Victory Plaza was well lit. Move the power. The captain held his gaze for a moment. Then she executed the order. It was the first of many. Over the next 48 hours, Mercer restructured Ironhold's defense priorities with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years studying how people died in emergencies and had decided to prevent every death he could anticipate. He opened evacuation corridors that had been sealed for decades. He repositioned medical frigates from rear staging areas to forward positions along civilian transport routes. He ordered emergency communication systems recalibrated to broadcast on civilian frequencies, first military frequencies second. Each order generated resistance. Each resistance was met with the same quiet logic. The most significant confrontation came not from the council, but from the officers who served under him. Mercer ordered a complete revision of the emergency communication protocols. The existing system transmitted alerts on encrypted military frequencies, then filtered through civilian communication offices that translated and rebroadcast them to the public. The process took between 4 and 7 minutes. 4 to 7 minutes. In a bombardment that was the difference between orderly evacuation and stampede. Mercer ordered the system inverted. Civilian frequencies would receive alerts simultaneously with military channels. The language would be simplified. Every alert would include three pieces of information: what was happening, where to go, and how long they had. Nothing else. The communication chief objected forcefully. If we broadcast on open civilian frequencies, the enemy can hear our alerts. They will know our evacuation timing. They will target the corridors. Mercer listened. He nodded slowly. Then he asked a question. If the enemy targets evacuation corridors, what does our defense fleet do? The communication chief paused. Protects them, she answered. Exactly, Mercer said. The corridors become priority targets, and priority targets receive priority protection. We are not hiding our evacuation plans from the enemy. We are daring them to attack the one thing we will defend with everything we have. The communication chief stared at him for a long moment. Then she redesigned the system in 12 hours. When General Holt challenged the repositioning of medical frigates during a council briefing, Mercer responded with a single question. How many civilians died during the Talon Rift engagement because medical ships were positioned behind the battle line instead of along evacuation routes? Holt's jaw tightened. The answer was 237. Everyone in the room knew the number. No one had ever framed it as a consequence of fleet positioning before. Mercer continued. Those deaths were classified as unavoidable collateral. I am reclassifying them as preventable, and I am adjusting our deployment to prevent them. Holt said nothing more in that meeting, but Lyra, watching from her position at the head of the council table, noticed something in his expression that troubled her. Not anger. Anger she could manage. What she saw was patience, the patience of someone who was waiting for something. She filed it away. That evening, alone in her private study, Lyra reviewed the defense grid's communication logs, not the official channels. The deep system logs that recorded every electromagnetic emission from every transmitter on the planet. It was a habit she had developed years ago when her father had taught her that the most important information was always in the data that no one thought to check. She found the anomaly on the third hour of review. A transmission burst. Brief. Encrypted. Originating from within the Capitol Bastion itself. Routed through a series of relay points that bounced the signal through Ironhold's own defense ring, satellites, before launching it outward beyond the sensor perimeter into open space. Someone inside the Bastion was communicating with someone outside Ironhold's defenses. Lyra's blood went cold. Not from fear, from the particular fury of someone who had trusted the people around her and was now confronting the possibility that one of them was a traitor. She traced the signal path. The encryption was military grade, the kind available only to senior officers. The relay routing was sophisticated, designed to mimic standard defense grid calibration signals. Someone with deep knowledge of Ironhold's communication architecture had built this channel carefully over time, hiding it in plain sight. The signal originated from the eastern wing of the Bastion. Senior officer quarters. Marcus Holt's quarters were in the eastern wing. Lyra closed the display. She sat in silence for a long time. The weight of what she had found pressed against her chest with a force that made breathing difficult. If Holt was communicating with external forces, then the coming attack was not just anticipated. It was coordinated. The enemy knew things they should not know. Shield frequencies, defense grid rotation schedules, the timing of the command transition. Her first instinct was to arrest him immediately, confront him, strip his rank, lock him in a cell and tear his communication network apart piece by piece until she found every connection, every contact, every piece of information he had transmitted. But Lyra had not survived the politics of the Ashford dynasty by following first instincts. If she arrested Holt now, she would have one traitor in custody and no knowledge of how deep the network went. She would not know who he was communicating with. She would not know what information had already been shared. She would not know whether there were others. And the enemy, alerted by the sudden silence of their source, would adjust their plans in ways she could not predict. There was another option, more dangerous, more uncertain, but potentially far more valuable. Leave the channel open, control what flowed through it, turn the traitor's weapon into her own. The weight of this decision was not tactical, it was moral. Leaving Holt in place meant allowing a traitor to continue operating within the highest levels of Ironhold's government. If she misjudged the situation, if Holt transmitted something she had not anticipated, people could die. Not abstract people in simulation models. Real people in real homes on a real planet. This was not a decision she could make from data alone. Data told you what was probable. It did not tell you what was right. She needed to tell Mercer. But a part of her resisted, not because she doubted him, because she was afraid of what this would reveal about the situation she had created. She had chosen this man. She had staked everything on him. And now she was about to tell him that the planet he had been asked to defend was already compromised from within. She went anyway, because Lyra Ashford did not let fear make her decisions. She let it inform them. Mercer's quarters were modest. He had been assigned the suite appropriate for the Supreme Commander of Planetary Defense, a set of rooms that could have housed a small family in comfort. He was using one room, the bedroom. The rest were untouched. When Lyra arrived, escorted by her personal guard who waited outside, she found him sitting at a small desk studying evacuation route maps on a portable display. He looked up when she entered. His expression shifted from surprise to attention in less than a second. He read her face the way he read emergency situations. Quickly, accurately. "Something is wrong," he said. It was not a question. Lyra closed the door behind her. She stood across from him and told him what she had found. The transmission burst, the encryption, the relay routing, the signal origin in the eastern wing. She told him her suspicion about Holt. She told him her reasoning for not arresting him immediately. She told him the options she was considering. Mercer listened without interrupting. His expression did not change. No shock, no outrage, just the focused calm of someone processing information and building a response architecture in real time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "You want to feed them false information through Holt's channel?" "Yes." "What kind of false information?" Lyra sat down across from him. For the first time since the appointment, they were not princess and commander. They were two people facing a problem that could destroy everything, and the formality of rank seemed suddenly irrelevant. "We tell them what they want to hear," she said. "That the defense transition is creating vulnerabilities. That the shield grid will have a 6-hour window of reduced coverage during system recalibration. We give them a target they cannot resist. And when they come through the door we have opened for them, they find something they did not expect." Mercer studied her face. "You are asking me to design a trap that uses our own planet as bait. I am asking you to trust that I know what I am doing." Silence held between them. The portable display cast pale light across both their faces. Outside, somewhere far above, orbital cannons completed another calibration cycle. "This is your decision," Mercer said carefully. "You are the authority here. If you believe this is the right path, I will design the tactical framework. But the decision to leave a traitor in place to risk the information he might still transmit that decision belongs to you." Lyra met his eyes. She understood what he was doing. He was acknowledging that this choice carried a weight that no simulation could calculate. If she was wrong, the consequences would fall on her. She appreciated the honesty more than she could express. "The decision is mine," she confirmed. "Design the trap." He nodded once. Then he pulled the evacuation maps aside and opened a new display. "We give them a window," he said. 6 hours of apparent shield weakness in the northern defense arc. But we preposition our response assets along the civilian evacuation corridors, not along the attack vector. When they come through the gap, they expect to find a planet scrambling to respond. Instead, they find a planet that has already moved its people to safety and is waiting for them with clear firing solutions. And if they do not take the bait, they will. They believe Ironhold has chosen a weak commander. They want to believe we are vulnerable because that belief justifies everything they have been planning. People always take the bait when it confirms what they already want to be true. Lyra studied him. In that moment, she saw something she had not seen in his file. He was not just a man who saved people. He was a man who understood people, who understood fear, who understood the way desire and belief created blind spots that could be exploited. He was far more dangerous than anyone on the Defense Council had imagined. "Do it," she said. For a moment, they faced each other across the small desk. The moment held something neither of them named, not romance, not attraction, understanding. The particular understanding that exists between two people who have both been told that the world works one way and who have both discovered that the world works differently. Lyra had discovered it through data, through 31 hours in a dark chamber watching simulations of her world dying because everyone had been building defenses against the wrong enemy. Mercer had discovered it through 17 missions. Through carrying people through collapsing tunnels and chemical clouds and debris fields, learning with each extraction that the thing most likely to kill you was not the enemy's weapons, but the absence of someone who cared whether you lived or died. Different paths, same destination. And now they were going to defend a planet together. Lyra turned toward the door. As she reached for the panel, Mercer spoke. Your Highness. She paused. The simulation you ran, the one that made you choose me. What was the number? She looked back at him. He was watching her with the calm curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to know, not to validate himself, but to understand the mind of the person he would be working with. 12%, she said. Improvement in planetary survival probability. He nodded slowly. And the civilian casualty projection. 0, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then the crease at his brow softened. Not a smile exactly, but close. That is the only number that matters, he said. Lyra left his quarters and walked through the silent corridors of the bastion toward her own chambers. She had made her choice. She had made her gamble. Now she had to see it through. The deception was set in motion within hours. Lyra authorized a series of defense grid recalibrations that were genuine in every technical detail except one. The shield coverage reduction in the northern arc was real, but it was scheduled to last 15 minutes, not 6 hours. The false duration was transmitted through Holt's compromised channel by embedding it in routine maintenance communications. Mercer quietly repositioned assets. Medical frigates moved to forward positions along northern civilian evacuation routes. 2 assault squadrons were staged behind Ironhold's largest moon out of sensor range. Emergency shelters in the northern residential sectors were pre-activated. Civilian alert systems were primed for silent deployment. Every move looked from the outside like the fumbling adjustments of an inexperienced commander still learning his role. From the inside, they were the precise components of a trap. Holt, watching from his seat at the council table, showed no visible reaction. He believed he already knew what was happening, a weak commander making weak decisions. The information flowing through his channel confirmed it. He did not know that every time he returned to his quarters and activated his shielded communication room, the signal he transmitted had already been shaped by the woman he had dismissed as a naive princess playing at strategy. 4 days after the deception began, the long-range detection grid triggered. The alarm filled the chamber with a deep, steady tone. Incoming fleet. Multiple contacts. Emerging from slip space beyond the outer defense ring. Dozens of ships materialized from the distortion of faster-than-light travel. Their hulls were marked with pirate war banners, crude painted insignias that flickered in the light of their own engines. But these were not the ragged vessels of opportunistic raiders. These ships were heavy, organized into attack formations that spoke of coordination and planning. A coalition fleet, larger than intelligence had predicted. Pirate warlords from the outer territories, mercenary companies from the border systems, and at least 2 former military vessels that had been decommissioned and sold on the black market years ago. Someone had been building this force for a long time. Someone with resources, someone with patience, and someone with information about exactly when to strike. The council erupted. Deploy full counterstrike, one counselor demanded. Activate heavy bombardment protocols. Target their command ship immediately. Others joined the chorus. Voices overlapped. Fingers pointed at tactical displays. 3 centuries of military tradition surged to the surface, demanding the response that Ironhold had always given. Maximum force, immediate retaliation. Show the enemy the cost of approaching the fortress world. Mercer studied the fleet formation carefully. His eyes moved across the display with the focused attention of someone reading a language that others could not see. The formation was aggressive, but not reckless. The ships were arranged to funnel through the northern defense arc exactly where the shield gap had been advertised. They were coming through the door that Lyra had opened for them. The bait had worked, but something else caught his attention. The fleet's center of mass was offset. The heaviest ships, the ones with the most firepower, that were not positioned at the front of the formation. They were trailing, held back, as if the vanguard was expendable, as if someone expected the first wave to encounter resistance and was willing to sacrifice it to test Ironhold's response. This was not a raid, this was a probe. And behind the probe was the real attack. Mercer filed that observation. Then he did something unexpected. Open a channel, he said. The council stared at him. They are preparing attack positions, General Holt snapped. His voice carried contempt that was no longer bothering to disguise itself. This is not the time for communication. This is the time for action. Yes, Mercer replied calmly, and they expect fear. He held Holt's gaze for 1 second longer than necessary. Not a challenge, an observation. Then he turned back to the communication officer. The channel opened. Static hissed across the connection, the deliberate interference of a fleet that wanted to project dominance even in its communications. A voice came through, male, amused. The kind of amusement that comes from believing you hold every advantage. Iron Hold, we have come to test your new commander. The pirate leader's voice dripped with theatrical mockery. We hear he is a man of mercy. Let us see how mercy performs against cannon fire. Mercer transmitted calmly. His voice carried no tension, no anger, no fear, just the measured clarity of someone delivering information. This is Iron Hold planetary defense. Civilian evacuation corridors are already active. There are no hostages to take, no panic to exploit. You may turn back now. Laughter echoed across the channel, not from one voice, from many. The bridge crews of a dozen ships laughing at the fortress world that had chosen a commander who opened conversations instead of firing solutions. The pirate leader responded through the laughter. You think mercy is strength? No, Mercer answered evenly. I think discipline is. The transmission ended. Moments later, the pirate fleet advanced. The sky above Iron Hold ignited. Orbital cannons fired in controlled bursts, targeted sequences that Mercer had designed to serve a dual purpose. Each burst cleared an evacuation corridor. The cannon fire swept enemy fighters away from the paths that civilian transports would use, creating safe channels through the chaos of battle. Shields flared bright under bombardment. The northern arc absorbed the first wave of enemy fire. The shields held. They had never been weakened. The 6-hour window had never existed. The pirate vanguard, expecting to punch through compromised defenses, instead met full shield integrity and focused defensive fire. Explosions rippled across space like silent storms. Debris spun outward from shattered pirate vessels. The vanguard faltered. Ships that had expected an easy breach found themselves caught in a crossfire between orbital platforms that had been quietly repositioned over the past 4 days. But inside the cities below, something different happened. Something that no previous defense of Iron Hold had ever achieved. There was no screaming, no chaos, no stampedes in the corridors. Evacuation corridors opened in precise sequence. Civilian transports lifted in organized waves, each one guided by communication systems that broadcast clear, calm instructions on frequencies that every household receiver could access. Emergency alerts were simple, direct, rehearsed. Shelter locations are open in your sector. Transport departures every 4 minutes. Medical personnel are stationed at every corridor junction. You are not forgotten. People moved with purpose, because they trusted the system, because the system had been built around them. Mercer coordinated defense fleets with measured focus. His voice never rose. His orders never carried urgency. They carried precision. Redirect Squadron 3 to escort Hospital Convoy Alpha. Shift shield reinforcement to residential Sector 12. Delay counterstrike by 2 minutes to confirm evacuation completion in the northern quarter. Delay counterstrike. The words sent a visible ripple through the command center. Officers exchanged glances. Delay meant absorbing more enemy fire. Delay meant shields taking additional punishment. Delay meant the enemy had 2 more minutes to organize to probe to find weaknesses. But delay also meant that the 3,000 civilians still moving through the northern evacuation corridors would reach shelter before the counterattack redirected enemy fire toward their sector. 2 minutes, 3,000 lives. Mercer did not explain the math. He did not need to. The officers executed the order. They were beginning to understand. The council watched from their elevated gallery, tension carved into every face. Holt stood at the railing, his knuckles white, his expression unreadable. The battle was not unfolding the way he had expected. The deception he had facilitated was supposed to deliver a decisive blow against a vulnerable target. Instead, the pirates were bleeding against shields that should have been weakened and defenses that should have been in disarray. Something had gone wrong with his plan. He could feel it. But in the chaos of battle, he could not identify what. Then the main display updated. A single contact larger than the others broke formation from the trailing element of the pirate fleet, a dreadnought, heavy armor, heavy weapons, the kind of ship that existed for one purpose, to break things that were not supposed to break. It was not heading for the defense ring. It was not targeting the orbital cannons. It was heading directly for the capital bastion. Targeting the palace, a tactical officer shouted above the noise of battle management. The dreadnought has broken through the secondary defense perimeter. Impact trajectory confirmed. It is aiming for the seat of government. The council looked to Lyra. Every face turned toward her. They waited for her to give the order that would save herself. Lyra did not give that order. She looked at Mercer. He did not hesitate. Divert palace shield reserves to civilian housing grid, he said. The words fell into the command center like stones into still water. Ripples of shock spread outward. That leaves us exposed, a counselor warned. Holt surged forward. This is treason, he shouted. He is stripping our defenses. I demand his immediate removal from command. The chamber erupted. The dreadnought continued its approach. Seconds mattered. Lyra Ashford stood. The chamber did not fall silent because she raised her voice. It fell silent because she did not. She stood with the particular stillness of someone who had made a decision that would define everything that came after, and the absolute calm of that stillness carried more authority than any shout could have. She looked at Marcus Holt. She looked at the council. She looked at the tactical displays showing the dreadnought bearing down on her home, on her throne, on her life. Then she looked at Mercer, and in his eyes she saw what she had seen in his file, what she had seen in the simulation, what she had seen in the quiet room where he had told her that people mattered more than machines. Conviction. The conviction of a man who had carried a child through a chemical cloud and had not mentioned it in his report. Execute his order, Lyra said. Her voice was level, absolute, final. The energy flow shifted. Palace shield reserves surged outward, reinforcing the civilian housing sectors. The capital bastion shields dropped to 20% capacity. The council chamber, the throne room, the governmental heart of Ironhold was exposed. Holt stared at her. For the first time, his composure cracked. Not because the shields were down, because she had chosen, definitively, irreversibly. She had chosen the man who saved people over the institution that ruled them. And in that choice, Holt realized something that chilled him more than any enemy weapon could. He had lost. Not the argument, not the political maneuvering. He had lost Lyra. She was beyond his influence now, beyond the council's influence. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and she had done it with open eyes and absolute certainty. The dreadnought fired. The blast struck the capital bastion's diminished shields. The chamber trembled. Lights flickered. Dust fell from stone walls that had stood for 3 centuries without shaking. Emergency lighting activated in amber pulses. The shield held. Barely. 20% capacity absorbed the impact that would have overwhelmed a civilian housing grid. The bastion shook but did not break. The stone walls built by people who understood that true strength was not about choosing between old and new, but about refusing to abandon either absorbed the residual energy and held. And in the residential sectors, that would have taken the overflow energy. From a palace shield deflection, 60,000 people sat in emergency shelters, alive unharmed, unaware of how close they had come, protected by a decision that had been made in a chamber above them, by a man they had never met and a woman who had chosen him. Simultaneously, the orbital cannons that Mercer had repositioned over the past 4 days aligned with geometric precision along the dreadnought's post-firing trajectory. A ship that has just discharged its primary weapon is for approximately 11 seconds at its most vulnerable. Shield generators are recharging. Weapon capacitors are cycling. Defensive systems are temporarily deprioritized. 11 seconds. Mercer had calculated for this. Every repositioned cannon, every adjusted firing arc, every seemingly random adjustment he had made to the defense grid had been building toward this moment. Focused fire converged from 7 orbital platforms simultaneously. The dreadnought's shield shattered. Its hull fractured along structural lines that the concentrated fire exploited with surgical precision. The ship broke apart in silence As all things break apart in space without sound, without drama, just light and debris and the slow, expanding cloud of what had been the most dangerous weapon in the pirate fleet. It fell in burning fragments toward the upper atmosphere, where Ironhold's defense grid caught the debris and vaporized it before it could reach the surface. The remaining pirate ships hesitated. Their dreadnought was gone. Their vanguard was shattered. The shield gap they had been promised did not exist. The panic they had expected to exploit was absent. The weak commander they had been told about had just destroyed their most powerful asset with a defensive repositioning that no one had seen coming because everyone had been looking at the wrong thing. They had been looking at the cannons. Mercer had been looking at the people. One by one, pirate vessels began to retreat, not in formation, not in orderly withdrawal. They simply turned and ran, each ship making its own calculation that the cost of continuing had exceeded any possible gain. The battle ended not with a final explosion, but with absence. The enemy left. The space around Ironhold cleared. The defense rings hummed in steady rhythm. The shield grid stabilized. And in the command center, Ethan Mercer exhaled slowly. For the first time since the alarm had sounded, his shoulders dropped. His hands, which had been steady throughout, trembled once. Briefly. He pressed them flat against the console, and the trembling stopped. 17 extractions, he murmured under his breath. Let us make it 18. No one heard him except Nora, who stood where she always stood, 2 paces behind. Damage reports streamed in. Shield strain significant, but within recovery parameters. Orbital cannon thermal load moderate. Infrastructure damage to residential sectors minimal. Military casualties 4 wounded, none critically. Civilian casualties 0. The number hung in the air of the command center like something sacred. 300 years of Ironhold's history, dozens of engagements, hundreds of skirmishes, and civilian casualties had always been part of the accounting. They were listed in reports under headings like collateral impact and non-combatant losses. Numbers that commanders noted and counselors acknowledged, and everyone accepted as the unavoidable cost of defending a world at war. 0 was not a number Ironhold was accustomed to seeing in that column. The council stood in stunned silence. Whatever arguments they had been preparing, whatever political maneuvers they had been planning, all of it evaporated in the face of that single number. Lyra watched from the gallery railing. Below her, Mercer stood at the command console. His posture was still straight, his expression was still calm, but Lyra could see his hands, pressed flat against the console surface, and she could see the faint tremor that ran through his fingers before he stilled them through force of will. He was afraid. He had been afraid the entire time. Not of the enemy, not of the dreadnought. He had been afraid of the number. Afraid that this time, for the first time, the number would not be 0. He was not fearless. He was terrified. And he did it anyway, every single time. That was the difference between Ethan Mercer and every decorated hero in Ironhold's history. The heroes were brave. Mercer was afraid. And afraid people who act anyway are not brave. They are something more. They are reliable. In the command center, Mercer finally lifted his hands from the console. The trembling had stopped. He looked at Nora. "How are the evacuation corridors?" he asked. "Clear," she replied. "All civilians return to residential sectors. Emergency shelters standing down." He nodded. "Good. Schedule a debrief for 0600. I want every corridor supervisor's report on what worked and what did not. And find out who designed the signage in Sector 14. It was excellent. I want that approach replicated across all sectors." Nora almost smiled. "You just survived a planetary assault, and your first priority is signage." Mercer looked at her with the faint crease at his brow that was his version of a grin. "Signage saves lives, Nora. Cannons just buy time." She shook her head, but she made the note. She always made the notes. But the battle was over, and the war had not yet begun. The pirate fleet was a probe. Mercer had seen it. Lyra had seen it. The heavy ships trailing behind the vanguard, the ones that had turned and fled when the dreadnought fell, they were not the main force. They were the test. Somewhere in the darkness between systems, someone was analyzing what had happened today. Someone was studying Ironhold's response patterns, its shield configurations, its defensive positioning. Someone was learning, and Lyra still had a traitor sitting at her council table. The next battle would not be the same. The enemy would adapt. They always did. And when they came again, they would not come with the confidence of predators attacking vulnerable prey. They would come with the caution of hunters who had learned that their prey had teeth. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, for the first time in weeks, Lyra allowed herself to breathe. Not the controlled, measured breathing of a princess managing a crisis. The deep, unsteady breathing of a woman who had bet everything on a stranger and watched him prove her right. The silence after battle is not the same as peace. Peace is soft. Peace is the absence of threat. The silence after battle is something else entirely. It is the sound of a world holding its breath, waiting to see if the thing that just tried to kill it is truly gone or merely gathering strength to try again. Ironhold held its breath. In the hours following the pirate fleet's retreat, the planet's defense grid remained at full alert. Orbital cannons tracked the empty space where enemy ships had been their targeting systems, cycling through scan patterns with tireless mechanical patience. Shield grids pulsed at elevated intensity, burning through energy reserves at a rate that could not be sustained indefinitely, but that no one was willing to reduce. Not yet. Not until the darkness beyond the defense rings had been empty long enough to trust. Lyra Ashford did not sleep that night. She stood in her private study surrounded by displays that showed every sector of Ironhold in real time. Civilian return protocols were proceeding smoothly. Medical stations reported minor injuries from the evacuation itself. Bruises, a twisted ankle, a child who had bumped her head against a shelter door frame and was crying more from surprise than pain. No casualties. The number was still 0. And every hour that passed without that number changing felt like a small miracle that Lyra did not entirely trust. She trusted data. She trusted patterns. She did not trust miracles. Miracles were what people called outcomes they had not planned for. This outcome had been planned, meticulously, painstakingly, by a man who fixed evacuation signs and a woman who ran simulations until 3 in the morning. This was not a miracle. It was math. But the math was not finished. Marcus Holt was still at the council table. His encrypted channel was still active. And somewhere beyond the defense rings, the fleet that had probed Ironhold's defenses was delivering its findings to whoever had organized the coalition. The probe had failed. But probes were designed to fail. Their purpose was not victory. Their purpose was information. The enemy now knew things they had not known before. They knew Ironhold's shield grid had not been weakened. They knew the defense restructuring was not the fumbling of an amateur, but the precise repositioning of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. They knew that the panic they had counted on did not exist. They would adapt. They always did. Lyra needed to move first. She summoned Nora Calloway to her study at dawn. Nora arrived in the uniform she had slept in, which was the same uniform she had worn during the battle, which was the same uniform she wore at all times because Nora Calloway did not believe in owning more clothing than necessary. Her eyes were alert despite the lack of sleep. Lyra studied her for a moment. She had reviewed Nora's file as thoroughly as she had reviewed Mercer's. 9 extraction missions together, 0 casualties. Nora was not just Mercer's second in command. She was his operational conscience. The person who translated his instincts into executable plans. "I need you to watch someone," Lyra said. "General Holt. I need you to monitor his movements, his communications, and his contacts within the Bastion. Quietly, without his knowledge, and without Commander Mercer's knowledge for now." Nora's expression did not change. She understood immediately that this was not a matter of doubting Mercer. It was a matter of protecting him. "How long?" Nora asked. "Until I tell you to stop," Lyra replied, "or until he makes a move that forces our hand." Nora nodded once and left the study with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent her career moving through dangerous spaces without being noticed. 3 days passed. The planet settled into a tense equilibrium. Repair crews worked on shield generators that had been strained during the battle. Engineers in the Northern Defense Arc quietly corrected the shield calibrations that had been part of the deception, restoring full coverage without public announcement. Mercer spent those 3 days doing what he did best, improving systems. He reviewed every evacuation corridor report from the battle. He identified 17 points where the process could be made faster, 12 points where signage was inadequate, and 3 points where structural modifications would reduce bottlenecks in future emergencies. He submitted improvement requests through proper channels, and when proper channels moved too slowly, he submitted them again with polite but persistent follow-up notes that the administrative staff began to recognize with a mixture of respect and mild exhaustion. He also did something no previous Supreme Commander had ever done. He visited the residential sectors personally, not as a ceremonial tour, not with cameras and escorts and prepared remarks. He walked through neighborhoods that had been evacuated during the battle, talked to residents who had used the corridors, listened to their accounts of what worked and what frightened them, and took notes on a small personal device that he carried in his jacket pocket. An elderly woman in Sector 9 told him the emergency shelter had been too cold. He made a note. A family in Sector 12 said the alert broadcasts were clear, but too fast for their grandmother who was hard of hearing. He made a note. A maintenance worker told him the corridor lighting in the subterranean passage between Sectors 7 and 8 flickered during the bombardment and people had stumbled in the dark. He made a note. A teacher from Sector 11 told him that the children in her care had been calm because the alert message said medical personnel are stationed at every corridor junction, and one of her students had said, if there are doctors, it must be safe. He made a note and underlined it twice. Small things. Details that would never appear in a strategic briefing or a council report. The kind of things that mattered only to the people who experienced them and therefore mattered more than anything else. Lyra received reports on these visits. She read each one with the careful attention she gave to all data, but she found herself reading them differently than she read tactical assessments or simulation outputs. She read them the way you read letters from someone whose perspective you are beginning to value, not just professionally, but personally. She caught herself and set the reports aside. There would be time for personal considerations later, if there was a later. On the 4th day, Nora delivered her findings. She arrived at Lyra's study in the early hours of the morning. Her expression was the controlled blankness of someone carrying information that was worse than expected. He has made contact 3 times since the battle, Nora reported. Each transmission was routed through the same relay network, but the content has changed. Changed how? Before the battle, the transmissions were brief, status reports, standard intelligence. Since the battle, the transmissions have been longer, more detailed, and the tone suggests urgency. He is afraid, Lyra said. He is desperate, Nora corrected. The probe failed. His handlers expected Ironhold to crack. It did not. Whatever arrangement he has with the coalition, he is now in a position where failure has consequences. A desperate traitor was more dangerous than a calculating one. Calculating traitors followed plans. Desperate traitors improvised. An improvisation inside the walls of a fortress could do damage that no external fleet could match. Is he planning something specific? Lyra asked. Nora placed a small data device on Lyra's desk. He referenced the internal communication grid, specifically the civilian alert system. Lyra's blood went cold. The civilian alert system. The one Mercer had redesigned. The system that had kept 60,000 people calm during the bombardment. The backbone of Mercer's entire defense philosophy. If someone corrupted that system during an attack, the result would be exactly the kind of chaos that Ironhold's enemies needed. Not shield failure. Panic. The weapon that killed planets from the inside. He is going to sabotage the alert system, Lyra said. That is my assessment, Nora confirmed. Lyra stood. She could not simply arrest him. Holt was a general, a member of the council, a man with allies and 3 decades of service. If Lyra arrested him without incontrovertible proof, the political fallout would fracture the council at the worst possible moment. She needed him to act. She needed him to commit an overt act of sabotage that could not be explained away. She needed to catch his hand before it struck. Continue monitoring, Lyra told Nora, but add a layer. I want a technical team standing by to isolate and restore the civilian alert system within seconds of any unauthorized modification. If he touches it, we catch him in the act and we reverse the damage before it reaches a single household. Nora studied Lyra's face. She saw something there that she recognized from years of working with Mercer. The calm expression of someone who was terrified and was going to act anyway. Understood, Nora said. She paused at the door. He is a general. He has access to systems that I may not be able to monitor completely. If he moves faster than we anticipate, the consequences could be severe. Lyra met her gaze. I know. This was the burden of command, not the decisions themselves. The knowledge that every decision carried the possibility of being catastrophically wrong, and the willingness to make the decision anyway. 7 days after the first battle, the long-range detection grid triggered again. This time the alarm was different, deeper, longer. The tone that meant not a probe, not a raid, an invasion. The holographic display in the command center expanded to show the space beyond Ironhold's outer defense ring, and every officer in the room stopped breathing. The fleet that emerged from slip space was 3 times the size of the first. Not dozens of ships, hundreds. Heavy cruisers, assault carriers, bombardment platforms with weapons designed to crack planetary shields through sustained relentless fire. And at the center of the formation, a command ship so large it registered on the display as a small moon. This was not a coalition of pirates. This was an army. Someone had been building it for years. The probe had been the final test, and whatever the results had told them, they had decided to commit everything. The council chamber erupted into barely controlled panic. Officers shouted status reports. Counselors demanded immediate deployment of every weapon system on the planet. The noise was enormous. The sound of 3 centuries of military tradition colliding with a threat that exceeded anything it had been designed to face. Mercer stood at the central console. His eyes moved across the fleet formation with focused attention, but this time his expression was different, harder. The crease at his brow was deeper. He was not just reading the formation. He was calculating something that went beyond tactics. He was calculating how long Ironhold's shields could hold against sustained fire from a fleet this size, and whether the evacuation protocols he had designed could keep millions of people safe for the duration. The math was not encouraging, but math had never stopped him before. Nora appeared at his shoulder. Her face was tight with controlled urgency. "Commander," she said quietly, "we have a problem inside the walls." Mercer glanced at her. "Go on." "Holt," she said, "he is moving. Right now, he left the council chamber 4 minutes ago. He is heading toward the communication hub, the civilian alert system." He looked across the command center to where Lyra stood at the gallery railing. She was already looking at him. Their eyes met across the chaos of the room, and in that single glance, a conversation passed between them that would have taken minutes to speak aloud. She knew. She had known about Holt. She had been waiting. Lyra gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Mercer turned to Nora. "Take a security team. Intercept him at the communication hub. Do not let him access the system." "And Nora," he held her gaze. "No harm. We are not them." Nora was already moving. In the command center, Mercer returned his attention to the fleet. He had to trust that Nora would handle Holt while he handled the invasion. Trust. The one thing no simulation could model and no algorithm could guarantee. The thing that held civilizations together when everything else failed. He began issuing orders. His voice was calm. His orders were precise, and this time the officers executed them without hesitation. They had seen the first battle. They had seen the results. They believed. Evacuations activated across every sector. The civilian alert system, still intact, broadcast clear instructions to every household on Ironhold. The planet moved with the coordinated purpose of a single organism. Millions of people following a plan they trusted, moving towards safety with disciplined calm. High above the orbital cannons opened fire. Not in frantic full barrage. In controlled, targeted sequences. Each burst served a purpose. Protect the corridors. Protect the people. Buy time. The enemy fleet advanced through the fire. Their shields were heavy. Their formation was tight. They pushed through the outer defense ring. Their bombardment platforms began sustained fire against Ironhold's planetary shields. This was the war that Lyra had predicted. Not a battle of decisive strikes. A war of endurance. The enemy had come to grind Ironhold down, to sustain pressure until something broke. Mercer did not break. He managed the defense the way he had managed 17 extractions, not by seeking victory, but by refusing defeat. Every decision was made in the same order. Civilians first, infrastructure second, military third. 20 minutes into the sustained bombardment, Nora's voice came through Mercer's earpiece. "Holt is in custody. He was at the communication hub attempting to upload corrupted protocols to the civilian alert system. The upload was blocked. The system is intact. Mercer closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, the command center saw no change in his expression. "Good work," he said. He paused. "Is he unharmed?" "Physically, yes. His dignity has suffered considerable damage." "Noted. Process him later. We have a battle to finish." But Lyra did not wait until after the battle. She left the gallery. She descended through the bastion's corridors with her personal guard flanking her, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who would not give Marcus Holt the satisfaction of her fear. The communication hub was a reinforced room deep within the bastion's infrastructure level. When Lyra arrived, Nora's security team had Holt seated in a chair, his wrists secured. Two technicians were running diagnostics on the alert system, confirming that the corrupted protocols had been blocked. Holt looked up when Lyra entered. His expression was not what she expected. Not defiance, not rage, resignation. The heavy, tired resignation of someone who had been carrying a weight for a long time and was almost relieved to set it down. "You knew," he said. "I knew," Lyra confirmed. "Since when?" "Since before the first battle. I found your transmission channel. I traced it to the eastern wing. I chose to leave it open." Holt stared at her. The implications unfolded across his face. She had known. He was a man who loved Ironhold and believed with absolute certainty that the path Lyra had chosen would destroy it. His betrayal was not greed or ambition. It was fear. Fear dressed in the uniform of pragmatism. "You were wrong," she said. Holt looked toward the communication displays. The battle data was visible on the screens. Shield status, evacuation progress. Civilian casualty count, 0. He said nothing. But his eyes stayed on that number for a long time. And in his silence, Lyra saw something she had not expected to see. Not just defeat, not just the resignation of a man who had been caught. She saw doubt. The first crack in the certainty that had driven him to betray his own world. The first moment when Marcus Holt considered the possibility that 0 casualties was not a fantasy, that it was a number that a man could maintain through skill and conviction and the terrifying willingness to put everyone else's life ahead of his own. It was not enough to forgive what he had done, but it was enough to make Lyra understand why he had done it. Lyra turned to Nora. "Hold him in secure detention, full protocols, no communication. He will be processed through proper legal channels with full rights of defense." She paused and looked back at Holt. "Ironhold does not execute its mistakes in the dark," she said. "We face them in the light. That is what makes us different from the people you were helping." She left the communication hub and returned to the gallery. The entire encounter had taken less than 10 minutes. In the command center below, Mercer had not paused. The battle had not paused. Because the system worked. Because it had been built to work even when parts of it broke. Because that was what it meant to build a defense around people instead of around weapons. The bombardment lasted 4 more hours. 4 hours of sustained fire. 4 hours of shield management and power redistribution and evacuation coordination. 4 hours during which Mercer stood at the command console and made decisions that kept millions of people alive while the sky above them burned with the light of weapons that could crack continents. The enemy fleet did not break through. Not because Ironhold's shields were impenetrable. They were not. 3 shield nodes failed during the bombardment. Power relays overloaded in sectors that absorbed more punishment than they were designed to withstand. 2 orbital cannon platforms were destroyed, their crews evacuated seconds before detonation by automated systems that Mercer had insisted on installing during his first week in command. But every time a shield failed, the failure was contained. Because the systems behind the shields were stable. Because the people behind the systems were calm. Because the evacuation corridors remained open, and the civilian alerts remained clear, and the emergency services continued functioning, the cascading collapse that the enemy was counting on never materialized. Morale did not crack, because people who trust their defenders do not panic, and people who do not panic do not collapse. And a planet that does not collapse can absorb an extraordinary amount of punishment and still stand. The enemy fleet exhausted its bombardment capacity 4 hours and 17 minutes after the engagement began. Their weapons fell silent, not from choice, from depletion. Energy reserves drained, ammunition expended. The sustained fire that was supposed to crack Ironhold had been absorbed by a planet that simply refused to break. And when the enemy fell silent, Ironhold's remaining orbital cannons, the ones that Mercer had held in reserve, the ones that had not fired a single shot during the entire 4-hour bombardment, opened up. Fresh, fully charged, precisely targeted. The counterattack lasted 11 minutes. It was not spectacular. It was not dramatic. It was the calm, systematic application of concentrated firepower against an enemy that had expended everything it had and had nothing left to absorb the response. Ships that had been firing for 4 hours, their shields depleted, their weapons empty, their crews exhausted, broke apart under fire. They could not return. The command ship, the one that had registered as a small moon on the display, took concentrated fire from 5 orbital platforms simultaneously. Its shields collapsed in stages, each failure cascading into the next until the massive vessel hung motionless in space, dark, powerless, surrounded by the debris of its own fleet. It did not explode, it simply stopped. The lights went out, the weapons went cold. And then slowly it began to drift, pulled by Ironhold's gravity toward the outer defense ring, where automated systems locked it in a tractor beam and held it still. A captured command ship, intact, with its crew, its records, its communication logs, and every piece of evidence needed to trace the coalition back to its organizers. The remaining enemy vessels scattered. There was no organized retreat, just ships running in every direction, each one carrying the same realization. Ironhold had not just survived, it had endured, and then it had struck back with everything it had held in reserve. The battle was over. Damage reports streamed in. Shield grids severely strained, multiple nodes requiring replacement. Orbital defense platforms, 2 destroyed, 4 damaged. Military casualties, 23 wounded, 2 critically. Civilian casualties, 0, 0, again. Still, always. In a quiet corridor behind the command center, Ethan Mercer leaned against a stone wall and let his head rest against the cold surface. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and deliberate, the breathing of someone who was consciously forcing their body to accept that the emergency was over. Nora found him there. She leaned against the opposite wall and waited. She had done this before. 9 times after 9 extractions. She knew the rhythm. I counted, Mercer said without opening his eyes. His voice was quiet, rough. Counted what Nora asked. Every corridor, every transport, every shelter capacity report. I counted them all, Nora, every number. While the bombardment was hitting, while the shields were failing, while Holt was trying to sabotage the alert system, I was counting people, making sure nobody was missing. He opened his eyes. They were red-rimmed, not from tears, from 4 hours of unblinking focus on holographic displays. 18 times now, he said. 18 times I have stood in a room and waited to find out if everyone survived. And every single time I am terrified that this will be the time the number changes. That somewhere in some corridor, I did not think about someone did not make it. He was quiet for a moment. The fear does not get smaller. You would think it would. 17 times, 18 times the number stays 0. And you would think the fear would ease. It does not. It gets larger. Because every time it works, the stakes get higher. Now 0 is not a surprise. It is an expectation. And the distance between expectation and failure is the most terrifying space I have ever occupied. Nora crossed the corridor and stood beside him, close enough that her shoulder touched his. The gesture was not romantic. It was the simple physical reminder that he was not standing alone. You are the best person I have ever served with, she said. And you are an idiot. He almost laughed. The fear is the point, Nora continued. The day you stop being afraid is the day you start accepting losses. And the day you start accepting losses is the day you become Commander Kane. Mercer looked at her. She looked back with the sharp-eyed pragmatism that had kept him alive through 9 extraction missions. You are afraid because you care, she said. That is not weakness. That is the job. Now stand up straight, Commander. Your planet needs you to look like you know what you are doing. He straightened. He took a breath. The crease at his brow returned, settling into its permanent position like a feature of the landscape. He adjusted his uniform. It was still unpressed. He did not notice. Thank you, Nora, he said. Do not thank me. Thank the signage designer in Sector 14. That person saved more lives today than both of us combined. He smiled, the faint, genuine smile of a man who had once again faced his worst fear and once again found that the number had not changed. Then he walked back into the command center to begin the work of rebuilding what had been damaged and improving what it held. Because that was what Ethan Mercer did. He did not celebrate victories. He studied them. He found the places where things had almost gone wrong, and he fixed them before they could go wrong the next time. He found the places where things had worked, and he made them work better. And he did it all without asking for recognition, without seeking praise, without ever once suggesting that what he had done was extraordinary. To him, it was not extraordinary. It was the wow, keep people alive, fix what was broken, prepare for the next time. The next time was always coming. Mercer stood at the command console. His hands were steady this time. The trembling that had followed the first battle did not come, not because he was less afraid, because he had learned that the fear was permanent. It was the price of caring whether people lived or died, and he had decided long ago that the price was worth paying. He looked up at the gallery. Lyra was looking down at him. "You risked the palace again," she said. Her voice carried across the quiet command center with clarity that reached every officer present. "Yes," Mercer replied. "You risked your own life, yes. And mine." He met her gaze. "If we protect ourselves first, we stop being worth protecting." For a moment, neither spoke. The words hung in the air, not as a military philosophy, not as a tactical doctrine, as a truth, simple, unadorned, the kind of truth that survives because it refuses to be made complicated. Lyra faced the council. "Ironhold was not tested by fire today," she declared. "It was tested by fear, and we did not fear." She gestured toward Mercer. "We did not fear, because he taught us that there is something more important than winning. There is refusing to lose what matters most." Days later, the galaxy received the battle recordings. They had been transmitted by Ironhold's communication office not as propaganda, not as military boasting, but as a matter of public record. Ironhold believed in transparency. It always had. And the recordings showed something that no one in the galaxy had expected. Ironhold had not won through overwhelming destruction. It had won through control, through unity, through the systematic, deliberate, unwavering refusal to sacrifice civilians for spectacle. The recordings showed evacuations that functioned with precision, communication systems that kept people informed and calm, a commander who delayed counterattacks to ensure evacuation corridors were clear, a princess who ordered her own palace shields diverted to protect residential housing. Other human worlds studied the data. Military academies requested copies of the defense protocols. Governments convened special sessions to review their own emergency systems. A new phrase spread across human space, carried by news channels and diplomatic communications, in the quiet conversations of people who had watched the recordings and recognized something in them that they wanted for themselves. "Save the people. The planet will follow." The formal announcement came 10 days after the second battle. Lyra stood before the full Defense Council, the military leadership of Ironhold, and a live transmission feed that carried her words to every household on the planet and every human world within communication range. She announced the marriage of Princess Lyra Ashford and Commander Ethan Mercer. She did not frame it as romance. She did not speak of love or affection or personal feelings. She spoke of policy, of architecture, of the deliberate strategic decision to bind Ironhold's future to the defense philosophy that had saved it. "This world has survived for 3 centuries because of its weapons," she said. Her voice carried the authority of 3 centuries of Ashford rule and the conviction of a woman who had earned her own authority through 31 hours in a dark room and 2 battles that proved her right. "It will survive the next 3 centuries because of its people. Commander Mercer has shown us what it means to build a defense around humanity itself. I am committing the Ashford dynasty to that principle. Permanently." The council did not object. They had no grounds for objection. The results were incontrovertible. The data was clear. After the public announcement, after the cameras powered down, and the council filed out and the bastion returned to its quiet routine of preparation and vigilance, Lyra found Mercer in the corridor outside the chamber. He was standing by a window that overlooked the city below, watching civilian transports move through streets that had been evacuation corridors days ago and were now once again simply streets. Children were playing in a park that had been an assembly point during the bombardment. A vendor was selling food from a cart that had been pushed aside to make room for medical equipment. Life was resuming, not because the danger had passed, because people believed it was safe to resume. That belief was the most powerful weapon on Ironhold, and Ethan Mercer had built it. She stood beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The window glass reflected both their faces overlaid on the city below. Two people standing side by side watching a world they had saved together. The galaxy will think this is a political arrangement, Mercer said. His voice was quiet, not hurt, not disappointed, simply observant. It is a political arrangement, Lyra replied. He nodded. Good. I would not want them to think Ironhold had gone soft. She looked at him, the faint humor in his voice, the crease at his brow. The calm that was not calm but courage so practiced it had become indistinguishable from peace. I chose you because of data, she said softly. 17 missions, 0 casualties, a 12% improvement in planetary survival probability. The data was clear. She paused. The pause lasted long enough for the light from the window to shift slightly, the planet's engineered magnetic field bending distant starlight into faint prismatic patterns. I am staying because of you, she said, not the data, you. Mercer looked at her. For the first time since she had known him, the crease at his brow smoothed. His expression opened. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough for her to see what was behind the calm exterior. Behind the mission reports and the evacuation protocols and the decline commendations and the notes about signage. He had been alone for a very long time. Not physically alone. Surrounded by people always. Nora, his team, the civilians he saved. But alone in the way that matters most. Alone in his conviction. Alone in his belief that saving people was more important than defeating enemies. Alone in a galaxy that celebrated destroyers and forgot protectors. And now someone saw him. Not what he did. Not what he achieved. Him. Thank you, he said. The words were simple. They carried everything he could not say and did not try to. Years passed. Pirate coalitions avoided human systems. Not because humans were the most violent species in the galaxy. Humans were far from the most violent. Not because human weapons were the most powerful. Other civilizations had weapons that made Ironhold's orbital cannons look like firecrackers. They avoided human systems because humans were the hardest to break. They did not collapse into chaos when the sky burned. They did not abandon their own when the shields fell. They did not turn on each other when fear spread through their corridors and their communication channels in their homes. They held together. They endured. They moved with purpose through evacuation corridors that someone had designed with their safety as the first priority instead of the last. They trusted voices on emergency channels that spoke clearly and calmly because the people behind those voices cared whether they lived or died. Humanity did not endure because it loved war. Humanity endured because it refused to abandon its own. And in the quiet chamber beneath the Capitol bastion, where 10,000 glowing records had once floated in concentric rings of blue light, Lyra stood beside Ethan. The system now displayed updated numbers. 18 extractions, 0 casualties. She looked at him. You were called the wrong choice, she said softly. He smiled, the faint smile that she had come to know as his truest expression. Not happiness exactly. Satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who had spent his life doing one thing and had done it well. Good, he said. Why good? Because enemies always underestimate the wrong choice. High above them, orbital cannons rotated in steady vigilance. Ironhold remained wrapped in iron. Its defense rings circled the planet in layered formation. Its shield grids shimmered across the atmosphere. Its magnetic field still made music play slightly off-key. But at its core, it was no longer metal that made it strong. It was something far more dangerous. Something that could not be broken by bombardment or shattered by invasion or corrupted by traitors. Something that grew stronger every time it was tested because every test proved the same thing. Humanity. And the galaxy would never mistake that for weakness again.